Thank you again for having us here today. My name is Will Herrera. I'm with iT1 Source, and today I'm going to talk about IOs and how they enter your data center, and talk about knowing your environment. Before I get started, though, somebody asked about a goat yesterday and see if we could have it, and I'm glad to say we can. We just need to know what color you want it, and Justin will be more than happy to ship it to you. So as we talk a little bit about, your understanding your environment, so we want to better understand, take a look at what your CPU and memory, those are fairly easy to understand in your environment to capture. Capacity is another one that a lot of people will already understand how much capacity they need. But do you know your applications? Which ones are single-threaded? Which ones are write-intensive? Do you have any performance issues, right? So when you're designing or refreshing your environment, maybe you have a budget to refresh your environment in your data center. Are you taking a look and see what application performance issues you have today, and how are you going to address those maybe before or with the new environment? How is that going to be addressed? Other things that you might want to take a look at is from a database perspective. If you have databases, are they set up correctly? Are you using best practices? Where's your temp DB? Are your logs in the right RAID type configuration? And then the last one on a couple of things, how virtual and physical are you? And how does that affect your licensing when when we're talking about servers, right? So we can get 18 cores on a single processor today. So if you're talking about adding more cores because of your licenses is by socket, not by cores, or vice versa, so you have licensing that is by cores and not sockets. So it just depends on what your licensing structures are. The higher you do go up in cores, the lower gigahertz you go. So it's one of those where you have to find that sweet spot. A couple of screenshots of a couple of free assessments that we do. These are primarily around storage. So take two environments that we took a look at. One environment, they were running around 18,000 IOPS, right? So when we look at IOPS, we look at measurement of performance, whether that's requests going to your disk, whether that's on a storage array or that's local, how much requests are going for reads and writes. So one of the customers we had was looking at around 18,000. Another customer was driving around 4,000. So take a look at those and also take a look at your read-write ratios. Your environment is going to tell you what type of configuration you need. So your read-write ratios, once you get over a certain point, over that less than 60% reads, we want to start talking about going to a different type, like RAID 10, right? So taking a look at environments and taking a look at how that performs. Disks have a big architecture, so these are not the actual size, if anybody's wondering. So on the left-hand side here, so we're looking at the 15,000 RPM hard drives are still pretty popular. Those are the performance drives that you'll see out there. Approximately about 180 IOPS you'll be able to drive to. 10K drives are becoming a lot popular with storage arrays. If you notice, a lot of them will put 2.5-inch drives, and they'll do a full tray, be able to put 24 drives in one tray. And they'll go up to 1.2 terabytes today, right? So the IOPS that I have on here is what a single drive is able to provide today, and it's using sort of what the industry is looking at today. I'm not looking at cache and additional components that if you had a storage array you'd be able to leverage. These are just from the spindle perspective. From 7.2 RPMs, those are high capacities. You're not looking to get performance out there, you're looking to get a lot of capacity, right? So we want to be able to store a lot of those. Solid state drives, so how do you know when you need solid state drives? Right? When does it make sense? Do I need an all solid state array? Do I just need a couple of drives? How do we determine what that looks like? And then the last one is flash modules are coming in, right? So they're a drive that's just flash cards in them, and these things can drive like 50,000 IOPS. If you definitely need one, feel free to reach out to Justin. He's looking forward to talking to you about those flash cards. With regards to the capacity at the bottom, I gave you 4 different types of scenarios. All of them are going to give you roughly about 40 terabytes of usable space. But you can sort of see in the 6th column there about maximum rate and what the workloads are. So if you went with the slowest drives, you may get a lot of capacity from those 18 drives, but you're only driving a very low amount of IOPS. So when you take a look at those customers and we see the amount of performance that their environment's taking, it's hard for me to be able, it's going to be hard for you to be able to drive the performance you need just from those, right? But for capacity or cold data that doesn't need performance, those are usually pretty good. So how do we go ahead and do sizing? So part of our assessment, we look at what's called a SKU. And from a SKU perspective, you're looking to see how busy is your system. So for example, this particular customer, 91% of all their IOs So the performance that he needs is being driven for only 22% of the total footprint that he has, right? So this is a perfect example where we want to put the SSD drives towards that, put that data on SSD drives. And then 15K, 10K drives, nothing wrong with them, right? There's a landing spot for it. Maybe that's a small amount that sits there. And then you have high capacity drives. Those capacity drives are cool data that is still needed for the environment. People still need access to it, but it's not critical right now, right? There's no requirements as far as being hit heavily. From this perspective, when we take a look at these assessments, we sit down with customers, we try to better understand, based on your environment, how do we size this for you and give you that performance. One other thing I want to touch base, most of the storage providers that we work with, this is all an algorithm on the back end. So while you're getting different types of drives, the system knows how to move that data between the drives. There's not an engineer managing and moving data between which type of drive it needs to be on. That's just an algorithm based on how often the data is being hit. And while you and I might look at a file that's 30 gigs in size, right, or a database, it's only looking at the blocks that are getting hit hard. So it will break your files up into small chunks, and those are the chunks that get moved to SSD. So it's very efficient on that perspective. Another quick assessment, right? So same customer, we're kind of looking at this. So looking at around 5,000 IOPS at peak, and roughly in that 99th percentile is probably sitting around 2,800 IOPS. But take a look at the latency at the bottom, right? So applications don't like to see that high of a latency. So if you have those performance issues, why is that spiking? Where's that coming from, right? So we want to take a look at that. So this particular customer just had a very high growth. They bought an array, they bought it previous year, and they just had an enormous growth that they needed. So do they need a new system? Is that something that we're going to require? There's a system performance that I need on this. So I'm going to give you an idea of what we see behind me. So the top one shows that, the top graph at the top shows that we're doing about 5,000 IOPS. The bottom one is a heat map. And this is data coming in, right? So the top ports at the top are your fiber channel or iSCSI, whatever. This customer is a fiber channel. As the data comes through, it hits your two storage processors, and it comes into the environment. Red is bad in this environment. So when you see those red boxes at the bottom, those are drives that just are at 100% utilization. They cannot deliver any more performance out of those drives. You may have capacity, but you have no performance left on those drives, right? And as you can see, it's not balanced. System isn't balanced. So sometimes just doing an assessment, take a look and see, is your system balanced? Are we running optimal in that environment? So we can kind of come in and help. So once we came in and took a look at the customer's environment, and we did some assessment, for this particular customer, we added 7 drives. That's all we added to the environment. As you can see, the top row there of drives, the 2 of them are taking the biggest hit. They're SSD drives that we put into the system that was able to offset all of that extra load. Then you can sort of see that the CPUs are balanced. The cache between the 2 systems in that yellow and red are sort of balanced. And while we're red, we're not touching the top, right? So we're not 100%. We're hitting about that 90, 95th percentile. And then the last drives came all the way at the bottom that we threw in there. So with 7 drives, redoing some of the how the system was set up, we were able to give them a lot better performance. So they went from 40 to 60 milliseconds down to sub-milliseconds in this environment. So those are the things that when you're having performance issues, but everything looks like you have plenty of capacity, we can kind of narrow down. And this is just an example that I selected just from looking at it from a I/O perspective from a data center, but sometimes it's CPU driven, sometimes it's a database guys, sometimes it's a network guy. We can blame it on a lot of people, but when we take a look at the data, it points out where that issue is. So I had these 2 guys up, right? So when you do design, keep recovery in mind. Also Travis, you might want to be careful with him with a power tool. I noticed what he can do up here. So those are guys that you want to be, if they enter your data center, you got bad problems there going on there. So this is my time. I appreciate you guys. We'll be in the booth in the back. Be more than happy to talk to anybody with regards to any data center or any conversations you want to have with regards to assessments or anything that we may be able to help you with. Thank you.